Alex stood frozen in the valley, the soft hum of the wind barely registering over the storm inside their head. Everything felt too big, too overwhelming, like they were standing at the edge of something impossible. They had imagined this moment for so long, played it over and over in their mind. But now that they were here, it wasn't excitement they felt. It was fear, raw and unshakable. Their hands trembled at their sides, fingers curling into fists, but no amount of effort could stop the doubt from creeping in. What if they weren't ready? What if they failed? What if this moment slipped through their fingers like so many others before it? The sun was dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the valley. But Alex barely noticed. The world around them felt distant, as if they were watching it happen from far away. Ember, the chestnut mare standing beside them, was completely still, her deep brown eyes watching without judgment. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't overthinking. She was just there, waiting. Alex wished they could feel that kind of certainty, that kind of peace, but instead, all they could feel was the weight of hesitation pressing down on their chest. The silence of the valley stretched around them, but it didn't feel calm. It felt suffocating. It felt like the whole world had paused, waiting for them to make a move, to do something, anything, instead of just standing there locked in their own head. The pressure was unbearable, but it wasn't coming from the outside. It was all inside them, building, growing, making it harder and harder to breathe. Alex had always been this way, always stuck between wanting something so badly and being too afraid to reach for it. They had spent years watching from the sidelines, convincing themselves that they would act when the time was right, when they were ready, when they were sure. But deep down, they knew the truth. The perfect moment never came. It never would. And if they didn't act now, they might never act at all. Their pulse pounded in their ears, loud enough to drown out the sound of the wind rustling through the grass. They looked at Ember again, at the way she stood so calmly, so confidently, completely unaffected by the storm inside Alex's mind. It wasn't the horse they were afraid of. It was themselves. It was the voice in their head telling them they weren't good enough, that they weren't strong enough, that they would mess this up just like they had messed up so many other things. They swallowed hard, shifting their weight from one foot to the other, trying to shake the feeling of being completely stuck. They had wanted this for so long. They had worked for it, dreamed about it, imagined it in every possible way. And yet, standing here now, it felt like the most impossible thing in the world. The fear wasn't just about this moment. It was about every moment before it. Every time they had let fear win. Every time they had stepped back instead of forward. Every time they had told themselves they weren't enough. It was all coming back now, pressing down on them like an invisible force, holding them in place. The fear whispered to them, telling them to walk away, to wait, to put it off for another day, another week, another lifetime. It would be so easy to listen, so easy to take a step back and pretend this moment had never happened. But something inside them resisted. Something small, something quiet. But there all the same. A part of them that didn't want to run this time. A part of them that was tired of waiting, tired of being afraid, tired of watching life pass by without ever stepping fully into it. They let out a shaky breath, trying to quiet the noise in their head, trying to feel something other than fear. The truth was, they didn't know what would happen next. They didn't know if they would succeed or fail or fall flat on their face. But they knew one thing. If they didn't try, they would regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, they would look back on this moment and wonder what could have been. And that thought scared them more than anything else. They reached out, fingers brushing against Ember's warm coat, And for the first time, the fear didn't feel quite so suffocating. It was still there, still whispering, still waiting to pull them back. But it didn't control them anymore. Not this time. I stood there, my feet planted in the dry earth of the valley, staring at Ember, the chestnut mare beside me, and I felt like I was standing at the edge of something huge. The wind swept across the open space, rustling the tall grass, but I barely felt it. My heart was pounding too hard, my mind spinning too fast. I had dreamed of this moment for so long, imagined it 1,000 different ways. But now that I was here, now that it was real, all I could feel was the crushing weight of hesitation. It should have been simple. I had planned for this, worked for it, told myself over and over again that I was ready, that I could handle it. But now, standing here with Ember waiting patiently, I wasn't so sure anymore. I could feel the doubt creeping in, filling every corner of my mind, whispering all the reasons I should walk away. What if I wasn't good enough? What if I made a mistake? What if I looked foolish, or worse? What if I let myself down? The more I thought about it, the heavier it felt, like the air itself was pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe, harder to think clearly. The choice was right in front of me, but the longer I stood there, frozen, the more impossible it seemed to move. It wasn't just about this one decision. It was about all the decisions I had avoided, all the times I had let fear dictate my actions, all the moments I had let slip through my fingers because I was too afraid to try. I hated that feeling, that deep regret that came from knowing I had held myself back. And yet, here I was, doing it again, stuck between the person I wanted to be and the fear that had always kept me from becoming that person. Ember stood still beside me, her ears twitching slightly, her large dark eyes watching me as if she could sense the war going on inside my head. She didn't care about my doubts. She didn't care about my fear. She was just there, waiting for me to decide. It wasn't the horse that scared me. It was me. It was the part of me that always found an excuse to stay in my comfort zone, to wait just a little longer, to tell myself that I would do it tomorrow, next week, next year. But deep down, I knew the truth. If I didn't do it now, I might never do it at all. That thought made my chest tighten even more. How many times had I told myself I would act when I felt ready? And how many times had I let that feeling of unreadiness stop me from doing the things I wanted? I kept waiting for some kind of sign, some moment of absolute clarity that would make the decision easy. But I knew that wasn't how it worked. There was never going to be a perfect moment. There was just this moment, right now. My hands felt clammy, my breath uneven. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, trying to steady myself, but nothing about this felt steady. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into the unknown, and knowing that the only way forward was to take the leap. My mind kept circling back to the same questions, the same fears. What if I wasn't good enough? What if I tried and failed? But then, another thought crept in, quieter, but stronger. What if I never tried at all? What if I spent my whole life standing at this edge, looking out at the possibilities, but never actually stepping into them? That thought hit me harder than any fear of failure ever could. I swallowed hard, looking at Ember again. She was still waiting, calm and steady, as if she knew I just needed time. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe it wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it wasn't about feeling completely ready. Maybe it was just about choosing to move forward anyway, even with the fear still there. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stop thinking, to stop overanalyzing every possible outcome. I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to take the first step. My hand moved before I could talk myself out of it, reaching out, feeling the warmth of Ember's coat beneath my fingers. The fear didn't disappear, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't about knowing exactly how this would go. It was about deciding to try, to trust myself, to take a chance. And in that moment, I knew I had made my choice. Ember stood beside me, still and calm, like she had all the time in the world. She wasn't impatient. She wasn't restless. She was just there, waiting, as if she understood that I needed a moment to figure things out. The quiet confidence in her presence made me feel even more aware of my own hesitation, my own racing thoughts that refused to settle. I had always admired that about animals, the way they existed fully in the present moment, never caught up in the endless cycles of doubt and fear that humans seem to struggle with. Ember didn't need reassurance. She didn't need a plan or a guarantee that everything would go perfectly. She was simply here, ready, steady, patient. I wished I could be more like that. I wished I could let go of the fear that was holding me back and just trust the moment. Trust myself. But my thoughts were tangled, caught in an endless loop of what-ifs. What if I wasn't ready? What if I made a mistake? What if I wasn't good enough? The weight of those questions pressed down on me, making it hard to move, hard to breathe. And yet, beside me, Ember remained completely unfazed, her steady breathing a stark contrast to the storm inside my mind. I glanced at her, searching for some kind of answer, some kind of reassurance. But she didn't give me one. She just stood there, her deep brown eyes calm and unwavering, as if to say, "It's your choice." That realization hit me harder than I expected. No one was going to make this decision for me. No one was going to push me forward or pull me back. It was entirely up to me. Ember was my guide, but she wasn't here to carry me through my doubts. She was simply here to remind me that I had the ability to choose for myself. The fear didn't disappear with that thought. It still sat heavy in my chest, a familiar knot of uncertainty that had been with me for as long as I could remember. But something about Ember's presence made it feel less suffocating. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't second-guessing herself. She was simply here, fully present, fully accepting of whatever came next. And maybe, just maybe, I could be too. I reached out slowly, my fingers brushing against her warm coat. The sensation was grounding, pulling me out of my head and back into the moment. Ember didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She simply stood there, steady as ever, as if telling me, "See? It's not so scary." I let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease just slightly. Maybe I didn't have to have it all figured out. Maybe I didn't need to wait for the fear to disappear completely. Maybe I just needed to take a step, to trust that I could handle whatever came next. Ember wasn't pushing me. She wasn't rushing me. She was just here, waiting for me to decide. And as I stood there, my hand resting lightly against her side, I realized that was enough. I didn't need a grand moment of clarity. I didn't need to have all the answers. I just needed to move. The fear was still there, but so was something else, something quieter, steadier. A small flicker of trust. Not in the outcome, not in some perfect version of myself, but in the fact that I was capable of trying. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I stood there with my hand resting against Ember's warm coat, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. And all I could think about were the moments I had let slip away, the times I had hesitated, the times I had convinced myself that I wasn't ready, that I wasn't good enough, that I should wait just a little longer. And so I had waited. I had watched opportunities pass me by, telling myself there would always be another chance, another time when I would feel more confident, more prepared, more certain. But those moments never came, not in the way I had imagined. I had spent so much of my life stuck in that space between wanting something and being too afraid to reach for it. And now, standing here with Ember beside me, I could feel the weight of all those missed chances pressing down on me like a heavy fog. I didn't want to live like that anymore. I didn't want to keep looking back and wondering what could have been if only I had tried. But even as I told myself that, the old fear crept in, whispering the same doubts it always did. What if I failed? What if I wasn't good enough? What if I made a fool of myself? The words had become so familiar, like an old song stuck on repeat in my head, playing every time I found myself standing on the edge of something unknown. I hated how easy it was to listen to them, how easy it was to believe them. But at the same time, I knew that if I let them win again, I would only be adding one more missed chance to the long list I already carried with me. I looked at Ember, standing there so calmly, waiting. She wasn't caught up in the past. She wasn't thinking about all the things that had come before this moment. She was simply here, in the present, ready for whatever came next. I wished I could be more like that. I wished I could let go of the weight of all the choices I hadn't made, all the paths I hadn't taken, and just focus on what was right in front of me. Because the truth was, the past wasn't something I could change. I could stand here all day thinking about the moments I had lost, the opportunities I had let pass me by, but it wouldn't make a difference. The only thing I had any control over was what I did right now. I had a choice. I could keep standing here, frozen in the same fear that had held me back so many times before, or I could do something different. I could take a step forward. I could stop waiting for the perfect moment and just act, even if I was scared, even if I wasn't sure how it would turn out. The thought sent a fresh wave of nerves through me. But there was something else too. Something lighter. Something that almost felt like hope. Maybe this was my chance. Maybe this was the moment I would finally stop letting fear make my decisions for me. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. The past didn't have to define me. The missed chances didn't have to be the story I kept telling myself over and over again. I could change things. I could make a different choice this time. I looked at Ember, at the way she stood there without hesitation, without doubt, and I felt something inside me shift. I wasn't going to let this moment slip away. Not this time. I was done waiting. I was done letting fear hold me back. My heart pounded in my chest as I tightened my grip ever so slightly, feeling the warmth of Ember's presence beside me. This was it. My chance to prove to myself that I could do this, that I was capable of moving forward, no matter how many times I had hesitated before. The past was behind me. The only thing that mattered now was what I chose to do next. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what that choice was going to be. I took a breath, but it didn't steady me the way I hoped it would. My heart was still racing, my thoughts still tangled, and my hands still felt unsteady. Ember stood beside me, unmoving, calm, waiting for me to make my choice. She didn't know what was going on in my head, didn't care about the hesitation that had kept me stuck in place for what felt like forever. To her, there was nothing complicated about this moment. There was no fear, no overthinking, no self-doubt. Just now. Just this. I wished I could feel that way, but the truth was, my mind was filled with everything that could go wrong. What if I wasn't ready? What if I made a mistake? What if I tried and failed? The questions looped through my head like they always did, familiar and relentless, trying to convince me to wait, to hesitate, to back away. But something in me knew that if I walked away now, if I let fear win again, I would regret it. Maybe not immediately, maybe not even tomorrow, but someday. I would look back on this moment and wonder what could have happened if only I had been brave enough to try. The thought of that regret was worse than the fear. It was worse than failing, worse than looking foolish, worse than whatever unknowns lay ahead. And yet, knowing that didn't make the fear disappear. It still sat heavy in my chest, still made my hands shake, still made my legs feel like they were made of stone. There was no perfect moment, no sudden burst of confidence to push me forward, no sign from the universe telling me I was ready. There was only the choice I had to make. I could stay where I was, safe but stuck, or I could take a step into the unknown. That was it. That was all. It should have been simple, but it wasn't. My fingers twitched at my side as I stared at Ember, searching for some kind of answer in the quiet steadiness of her presence. She didn't have one for me. She wasn't going to decide for me. No one was. This was my choice alone, and the weight of that realization settled deep in my stomach. No one could promise me it would go the way I wanted. No one could tell me that I wouldn't mess up, or that I wouldn't struggle, or that this would be easy. I had spent so much of my life waiting for certainty, for some kind of guarantee before I acted. But certainty wasn't coming, and if I kept waiting for it, I would never move. I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering in my ears. I had no idea if I was ready, no idea if I could do this, no idea if I would succeed, but I knew I couldn't keep standing still. I couldn't keep letting fear dictate my choices. I had to move. I had to try. My body felt disconnected from my mind as I reached out, my fingers brushing against Ember's coat. She was warm, steady, real. The fear didn't vanish, didn't suddenly make way for confidence. But it didn't stop me either. That was what mattered. That was enough. My breath shuddered as I took another step, slow but deliberate, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, and for the first time, I didn't let that stop me. I wasn't fearless. I wasn't certain. But I was moving. And that, I realized, was the only thing that mattered. I stood there, my breath still uneven, my heart still pounding, my hands still trembling just slightly. But something had changed. It wasn't that the fear had disappeared. It hadn't. It was still there, lingering, whispering, waiting for a chance to pull me back into hesitation. But for the first time, it didn't feel like the most powerful thing inside me. I had done it. I had moved. I had made the choice that fear told me I couldn't make. And even though nothing around me looked different, the sky was the same, the valley stretched out endlessly, the wind still tugged at my sleeves, everything inside me felt different, stronger, lighter. Ember stood beside me, as steady as she had been before, as if nothing had happened, as if this moment wasn't as monumental to her as it was to me. And maybe to the rest of the world, this wasn't a big moment. Maybe it was nothing at all. But to me, it was everything. Because I knew what it had taken to get here. I knew how many times I had told myself I wasn't ready. How many times I had let fear make my choices for me. How many times I had stepped back instead of forward. And now, here I was, standing on the other side of a decision I had almost been too afraid to make. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. But I had done it. And that mattered. That was enough. I had spent so much of my life thinking that strength meant never being afraid. That courage meant being completely sure of myself before I acted, that confidence was something I had to have before I could take the first step. But I had been wrong. Strength wasn't about being fearless. It was about feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. Courage wasn't about certainty. It was about choosing to act even when doubt still lingered. And confidence? Maybe that wasn't something you waited for. Maybe it was something you built by proving to yourself over and over again that you could do the things you were afraid of doing. I looked down at my hands, still unsteady, but they weren't weak. They had reached forward when I thought they wouldn't. My legs had carried me forward when my mind had told me to stay still. My heart had raced, my thoughts had spun in every direction, but I hadn't let them stop me. That was strength. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it win. I took a slow breath, letting the air fill my lungs, feeling the way it steadied me. The fear was still there, but it was smaller now. It no longer felt like an unstoppable force, no longer felt like something that had complete control over me. Maybe it never had. Maybe I had just believed that it did for so long that it had started to feel like the truth. But the truth was, I had a choice. I had always had a choice. And this time, I had chosen to move forward. That was what mattered. That was what changed everything. Ember shifted slightly beside me, her movement subtle, but grounding. She had never doubted me. She had just waited for me to realize what she already seemed to know, that I was capable, that I was ready, that I could do this. And now, I finally believed it too. The road ahead wasn't suddenly clear. There would still be more choices, more fear, more moments where I would have to remind myself that strength wasn't about certainty, but about action. But I had taken this step, and I knew I could take the next one. I wasn't fearless. I wasn't perfect. But I was strong in a way I hadn't understood before. And for now, that was enough.